Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/Brian E. Denton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading and reflection is from chapter 319. Chapter 319. The 5th of November was the first day of what is called the Battle of Krasno. Toward evening, after much disputing and many mistakes made by generals who did not go to their proper places, and after adjutants had been sent along with their counter-orders, when it had become plain that the enemy was everywhere in flight and that there could and would be no battle, Kutuzov left Krasno and went to Dombro, whither his headquarters had that day been transferred. The day was clear and frosty. Kutuzov rode to Dobro on his plump little white horse, followed by an enormous suite of discontented generals who whispered among themselves behind his back. All along the road, groups of French prisoners captured that day, there were 7,000 of them, were crowding to warm themselves at campfires. Near Dobro, an immense crowd of tattered prisoners, buzzing with talk, enwrapped and bandaged in anything that they had been able to get a hold of, were standing in the road besides a long row of unharnessed French guns. At the approach of the commander-in-chief, the buzz of talk ceased, and all eyes were fixed on Kutuzov, who, wearing a white cap with a red band and a padded overcoat that bulged on his round shoulders, moved slowly along the road on his white horse. One of the generals was reporting to him where the guns and prisoners had been captured. Kutuzov seemed preoccupied and did not listen to what the general was saying. He screwed up his eyes with a dissatisfied look as he gazed attentively and fixedly at these prisoners, who presented a specially wretched appearance. Most of them were disfigured by frostbitten noses and cheeks, and nearly all had red, swollen, and festering eyes. One group of the French stood close to the road, and two of them, one of whom had his face covered with sores, were tearing a piece of raw flesh with their hands. There was something horrible and bestial in the fleeting glance they threw at the riders, and in their malevolent expression with which, after a glance from Kutuzov, the soldier with the sores immediately turned away and went on with what he was doing. Kutuzov looked long and intently at these two soldiers. He puckered his face, screwed up his eyes, and pensively swayed his head. At another spot he noticed a Russian soldier laughing and patting a Frenchman on the shoulder, saying something to him in a friendly manner, and Kutuzov, with the same expression on his face, again swayed his head. "What were you saying?" he asked the general, who, continuing his report, directed the commander-in-chief's attention to some standards captured from the French and standing in front of the Przybylskian regiment. "Ah, the standards," said Kutuzov, evidently detaching himself with difficulty from the thoughts that preoccupied him. He looked about him absently. Thousands of eyes were looking at him from all sides, awaiting a word from him. He stopped in front of the Przybylski regiment, sighed deeply, and closed his eyes. One of his suite beckoned to the soldiers carrying the standards to advance and surround the commander-in-chief with them. Kutuzov was silent for a few seconds, and then, submitting with evident reluctance to the duty imposed by his position, raised his head and began to speak. A throng of officers surrounded him. He looked attentively around at the circle of officers, recognizing several of them. "I thank you all," he said, addressing the soldiers and then again the officers. In the stillness around him, his slowly uttered words were distinctly heard. "I thank you all for your hard and faithful service. The victory is complete, and Russia will not forget you. Honor to you forever." He paused and looked around. "Lower its head, lower it," he said to a soldier who had accidentally lowered the French eagle he was holding before the Privyazk standards. "Lower, lower, that's it. Hurrah, lads!" he added, addressing the men with a rapid movement of his chin. "Hurrah!" roared thousands of voices. While the soldiers were shouting, Kutuzov leaned forward in his saddle and bowed his head, and his eye lit up with a mild and apparently ironic gleam. "You see, brothers," said he when the shouts had ceased, and all at once his voice and the expression of his face changed. It was no longer the commander-in-chief speaking, but an ordinary old man who wanted to tell his comrades something very important. There was a stir among the throng of officers, and in the ranks of the soldiers, who moved that they might hear better what he was going to say. "You see, brothers, I know it's hard for you, but it can't be helped. Bear up, it won't be for long now. We'll see our visitors off, and then we'll rest. The Tsar will not forget your service. It is hard for you, but still you are at home while you see what they have come to," said he, pointing to the prisoners. "Worse off than our poorest beggars. While they were strong, we didn't spare ourselves. But now we may even pity them. They are human beings too. Isn't it so, lads?" He looked around, and in the direct, respectful, wondering gaze fixed upon him, he read sympathy with what he had said. His face grew brighter and brighter with an old man's mild smile, which drew the corners of his lips and eyes into a cluster of wrinkles. He ceased speaking and bowed his head as if in perplexity. "But after all, who asked them here? Serves them right, the bloody bastards," he cried, suddenly lifting his head. And flourishing his whip, he rode off at a gallop for the first time during the whole campaign, and left the broken ranks of the soldiers laughing joyfully and shouting, "Hurrah!" Kutuzov's words were hardly understood by the troops. No one could have repeated the field marshal's address, began solemnly and then changing into an old man's simple-hearted talk. But the hearty sincerity of that speech, the feeling of majestic triumph combined with pity for the foe and consciousness of the justice of our cause, exactly expressed by that old man's good-natured expletives, was not merely understood, but lay in the soul of every soldier and found expression in their joyous and long-sustained shouts. Afterwards, when one of the generals addressed Kutuzov, asking whether he wished to have his caluchet to be sent for, Kutuzov, in answering, unexpectedly gave a sob, being evidently greatly moved. All right, that concludes my reading of chapter 319. I will now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, day 319. Coriolanus and the Stone. An insult is more powerful in the mind of its recipient than in the mouth of its donor. Insults, after all, are merely the product of the lungs generating airflow and pressure to vibrate the vocal cords, thus forming, with fine articulation, a laryngeal sound. By the time this innocent physical process is complete, however, much damage can be done. Coriolanus, one of Shakespeare's finest tragic figures, stands as a testament to the awful degradation wrought by insult when coupled to a wimpish mind. That man, virile in martial strength, completely folds in feeble infamy when the plebeians revoke their support for his consulship. Enraged at this perceived insult, he sets off on a tragic path towards his own destruction at the hands of the enemy Volscians. Contrast Coriolanus with Kutuzov. Kutuzov, as we've seen lately, has suffered all manner of insult. Today these insults continue as he passes by an enormous suite of discontented generals who whispered among themselves behind his back. He doesn't respond with anger. Instead, he continues on his calm, Kutuzovian way. Abandoning any notion of harm generated by these insults, Kutuzov rises to offer his troops a rousing speech. And it works. The troops erupt in joyous, long-sustained shouts of support, and the campaign against the French continues apace. Coriolanus and Kutuzov are similar in many respects. Both are high-ranking military men. Both repel a foreign invasion. Both are presented with the opportunity to gain the adoration of their people. Coriolanus errs in allowing insult to take control of his mind. Kutuzov understands that insult leaves one free to do with it what one will. Daily meditation. Stand by a stone and revile it, and what will you gain? If then a man listens like a stone, what profit is there to the reviler? Epictetus, The Discourses. All right, that concludes my reading of and reflection on chapter 319 of War and Peace, complete with one of my favorite quotes from Epictetus, which teaches us not to care really about what people say about us. And this is going to be something I'm going to need to keep in mind if this Year of War and Peace recording ever gets critical mass, because I've mispronounced so many names and butchered so many languages. I'm sure to get the insult generative power of YouTube against me again if this thing takes off, which probably won't anyway. But anyway, if you do like my readings, you can support me by either purchasing the ebook A Year of War and Peace, where you won't have to listen to my horrible pronunciations, or becoming a patron at patreon.com, or even making a one-time donation to PayPal. The links to all that are down below in the description. Also down in the description, you'll find links to my Amazon wishlist for books and movies. If you decide to support me by purchasing one of those, we'll set up a Zoom call so we could talk about that book or that movie. In any event, your support is greatly appreciated. Tomorrow, we're going to be reading and reflecting on chapter 320 of War and Peace. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.